So for anyone who's watched the channel recently, you know that I'm pretty much a big Baldur's Gate 3 stan, and it's my favorite game of all time, and I never get tired of playing it. But I do want to talk about something that still sort of, I guess not really annoys me, but it's sort of like one of the biggest problems with the game, and it's the fact that Act 3 is still to this day, I mean, it doesn't feel like as good as Acts 1 and 2. It doesn't feel like a complete act. And I want to go over why after Acts 1 and 2, you kind of get burnt out on Baldur's Gate 3. And a lot of people, that's the point where they just put the game down and they feel like they've played enough of it, or they're just done with it. I think a lot of this is compounded by the fact that they opened the game up to early access so early in development, and that's where a lot of their feedback was focused, was Acts 1, and probably a lot of Acts 2 is getting it more polished. But I feel like in Act 3, the game was just, it got really, really big and it was spread too thin at that point. Even though I really, really love Baldur's Gate 3, and it is my favorite game of all time, after a certain point in like certain playthroughs, I'm like, okay, I've experienced enough on this playthrough, and I would like try and experiment on a different playthrough. And I feel like the main reason that is because they don't do a really good job of like connecting, like what happens from Acts 1 and 2 to Act 3. Because I feel like Acts 1 and 2 is like the first half of the game, and Act 3 is like the second half of the game. And with the act being so big and so expansive compared to the previous two acts, it almost feels like when you go from Act 2 to Act 3, you're playing like a different game almost. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're playing Baldur's Gate 3 from Acts 1 and 2, and you're playing Baldur's Gate 3.5 in Act 3 because it's so expansive and they try to do so much in it. And that's probably the biggest reason why, people in Acts 1 and 2, they feel like, okay, Act 1 is my start point, right? And I'm just sort of making my progress through Act 1. I'm, recruiting companions. I'm getting further into quest lines, or I'm filling certain quest lines, or whatever the playthrough might be. They continue that into Act 2, right? And Act 2 is just a further expansion of that. And by the end of Act 2, for some reason, it feels almost like the conclusion of a lot of those quest lines is either it's basically done, like it's basically complete, or it's just kind of like whimpered out. And that's probably the biggest issue with Act 3, is that a lot of the quest lines, or a lot of the continuation to quest lines, they're not satisfying. And I know you already know that the biggest comparison with this one is Carlax's quest line, is the fact that, I mean, after Act 2, she doesn't have a quest line, which is very unfortunate because, I mean, there's so many opportunities where she could have had a quest line. You could just tell, because it's Steel Watch. They have this I forgot, like this Steel Watch metal or whatever that you can constantly collect, and it's a lot like the metals that you could collect to, I guess cure Carlax's heart, right? But you can do nothing with that. The Steel Watch they make comments on Carlax's heart and how it needs to be repaired, or to go in for repair and stuff like that, and how you need to go to the Steel Watch foundry to repair it. But you can't actually do anything with that. Like, it's just like, oh, the quest is done. Like, Carlax's heart just can't be repaired, and the quest is just done. It's like obviously there's moments where it's like there's a lot of opportunity here, or like maybe they had ideas in place of what they wanted to do with like Carlax's quests, or even other characters' quests, or different quest lines. Like, another good one is, I would say, the whole Marina quest line with the hag situation. It kind of just pops up in Act 1 and has a really good start, but it disappears in Act 2, and then it just pops up out of nowhere in Act 3. You got to do like two, quests, I guess, to complete the quest line. It could have been a lot more interesting. I feel like if there was some addition to it in Act 2, or if it was more expansive in Act 3, kind of like how you're running around and finding the clown body parts in Act 3. That feels like a much more complete quest, and it's just in Act 3 alone, compared to, some of these other quests that are in Acts 1 and then Act 3, or, Acts 2 and then sorta in Act 3. It's just a lot of these quests, they start in Act 1, continue in Act 2, and then they don't really continue in Act 3. Like, Act 2 is really just an extension of Act 1. Like, it genuinely is, and it really feels that way. And the next thing I want to talk about is the playthrough time. And even though this isn't an issue for me because I love Baldur's Gate 3, like I understand it can be difficult to sink like 100 plus hours into a playthrough. I'm pretty sure everyone's first playthrough has to be somewhere in the realm of like 100 plus hours. You know, when you play a game for that long, it's just like any other RPG. If you play a game for that long, most people want to play it to completion just once. And I get that. And with how expansive and how big Act 3 is, it's so hard to get through a lot of that content. A lot of that content still feel like filler. Whereas Acts 1 and 2 are very tight in scope and they're very intentional with the content that's in those acts. And it feels like all of them have it feels like every quest, every action, every area, it has a place in the game. Act 3 starts to feel like just this sandbox of just random quests almost. There's a lot of quests in Act 3 that are just like, okay, I really don't even need to experience this twice. Like, I don't. It doesn't feel like that way in Act 1 and 2. So Acts 1 and 2, you might be able to get through them like 5 times because it's such an incredible experience. But once you get to Act 3, a lot of those quests that are just like purely Act 3 quests, this is another problem I have, is that a lot of these quests that are just purely in Act 3, they're skippable. Like, honestly, they are skippable. They're quests you can just play once and just never play them again. Like I said, personally, I could play Act 3 like forever. I could play Acts 1 and 2 forever. But this is a genuine problem with the game. This is a problem that, I mean, obviously the game's that it's going to always have for certain people is that they can always just get through acts, maybe just Act 1, like the first area, and they feel like that's the game for them. That it's just like it's perfect at that point, and they could just keep replaying that over and over and over again. Also, another reason why this doesn't really affect me is because I'm a big like completionist with my games. I should probably make a video on why I'm such a completionist with my games, because in basically every game that I play, every open world, every RPG game that I play, I can play the game from start to finish, do all my quests, do all the side quests, do all the collectibles, I mean, going into Witcher 3 and collecting all the supply caches in the entire map, going to Skellige, just going through and just finding all the supply caches. I can play that way and never get bored. Honestly, I can play that way and never get bored. Spend, dozens and dozens of hours just going through the same content over and over again, going to bandit camps, going through, whatever it may be. That just seems like, stuff that you only want to do once. I could just play it over and over again. I don't know, that's how I am. That's just how I am. And even though that kind of stuff isn't really present in Baldur's Gate 3 like it is in, like The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, again, a lot of your quests, they start to feel like checklist things because there's not really satisfying payoffs to them in Act 3, or they kind of whimper off after Act 2, or the ones that are in Act 3 are just kind of, it seems like they're just filling out the act because it's so expansive and it's so big that you need stuff to do. But the last thing I want to talk about was the performance of Act 3, which to this day, I mean, it could have used a lot more polish. It's okay now, like it's a lot more playable. Like at launch, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure some people in certain playthroughs, they couldn't progress through to like to the end of the game because it was bugged. And some people, they had such bad frame rate issues, like it was stuttering so bad and freezing up so bad that like they would get into the game, play like 10 minutes, and their frames would start freezing up to a point to where it would just stop the game. Like you can hear the noise in the background, but like the game would just stop and you couldn't play the game. And now they have fixed that stuff to where it's not as big of an issue. But I mean, to this day, they've released patches and stuff. Like just recently, they released a patch where certain save files, and this happened to me, certain save files, you couldn't like load them. So like you would try to load it and it would just like load forever. It would just show that blackout loading image and it wouldn't load forever. And I had like 4 or 5 Act 3 saves that just acted like that. And I couldn't play the game. So there's still issues to this day on Act 3's performance. It's not as buggy and stuttery and the game doesn't soft lock as often, but it still does it. I think that's just the nature of Baldur's Gate 3's Act 3. It's just, it's not as finished, it's not as polished as the first 2 acts were. I felt that myself a couple of times where I'm just like, do I really want to go into Act 3? Especially because I have a lot of mods, and with those mods, I have a lot of, like characters on my screen. So I have like the party extension mod. So I have like literally all the party members I could have if I'm doing like a good playthrough. and they're all on screen at the same exact time as all these other NPCs are on the screen. And it's just a recipe for disaster of bugs, instability, frame issues, glitches, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, that's really all I have to talk about on why Baldur's Gate 3 is probably really hard to complete for a lot of people in Act 3 or after they completed the game for the first time. Most people, this isn't really an issue because they complete the game once through, like from start to finish once anyways, and they can't fathom people like me who will play a game for like 20 playthroughs all the way to completion and just not get bored of it. They're like, you're an anomaly. And I am an anomaly. I'm not a regular, I'm not a real person, bro. Like a lot of my most favorite games, I have like 600 to like 900 plus hours in. Like that's not regular. That's insane. I don't know why I'm like that. Like Cyberpunk 2077 across, PC, across PlayStation, I have like 1100 hours in. Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably on the shorter side. I still have like 450 plus hours in. Mass Effect, the Trilogy Edition, I have like 700 hours in. Baldur's Gate 3, I probably have like 1470 hours in. It's like people they look at me like, what are you, like, what? How are you playing a game this long and not getting bored? I don't know. That's how I was built. That's just how I was. If I love a game, I really can play it at least at the bare minimum. If it's like in my top 30 games of all time, or if it's around that area, I could play it for at least like 6 playthroughs before I'm like fully done with it. Like I don't know. I'm just built different that way. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think about Baldur's Gate 3's issues in terms of being able to get through to Act 3. I know most people, they probably completed Act 3 up to, one or two times maybe. And, that was all they really needed to do with the game. Maybe they played on like their own character the first playthrough, and then the second playthrough they went with like Dark Urge or something. But yeah, if you experience any issues as to why you can't complete Baldur's Gate 3 after Acts 1 and 2, just let me know what they are. I'm pretty sure people have many different reasons as to why they can't complete Baldur's Gate 3 after Act 2. But yeah, that's just some of the reasons I found as to why people might not be willing to or might not be able to complete Act 3, in Baldur's Gate 3.